November 22nd, 1992. Peace has collapsed. The publishing of Rorschach's journal has unmasked Ozymandias as the mastermind behind the alien massacre hoax. Riots spread like fire through the cities. Politicians are assassinated. War breaks out, same as it ever was. As the nukes are armed, Rorschach frees a supervillain lover duo, Marionette and the Mime. He offers them a chance to reunite with their lost baby boy. This Rorschach is no mastermind. Can't wind his watch properly. It runs slow. Can barely tell his left from his right. An ironic problem with symmetry. But he doesn't need to be a genius when he has Ozymandias leading the way. He refuses to die with his world and legacy in shambles. So he does what he does best. He hatches a plan to find Dr. Manhattan and have him save the world. As the nukes launch, they cross over into a new universe. Clark Kent's sleep is restless. He dreams of his high school prom, the same night his ma and pa were killed by a reckless driver. He wakes in fright. Lois Lane can't remember the last time Clark had a nightmare. Clark can't remember ever having one. The final lines of the poem Ozymandias became an unfortunate omen to the fate of Adrian Veidt. All accomplishments, no matter how large, will crumble to dust at the hands of time. Alan Moore's Watchmen was a groundbreaking story for its time, asking what if superheroes existed in the real world. The answer was that they would be mostly ineffective against society-wide crime and global political issues. However, many future writers and comic fans would simply see the gritty tone and pessimism as a map for the future of superheroes. This led to the notorious dark ages of ultraviolence, sex appeal, and Rob Liefeld. That influence continued well into the new millennium, and especially seemed to influence DC's controversial reboot, The New 52. The New 52 was an almost complete reimagining of the DC universe, taking decades of history and events and condensing the fictional timeline into about 5 years at the get-go. We saw some questionable changes. Classic heroes were much earlier in their careers. Extensive violence was common. Teams like the Justice Society never existed, and notably, Superman's parents were killed in a car crash during his teen years, turning him into a brash, young hero. Beast Boy was red. To be fair to the New 52 and the writers who were involved with it, it was not all bad. I actually started solidly following the DC titles with New 52. There are some genuine gems in there, like Morrison's Action Comics, Snyder's Batman, Lemire's Animal Man, the Earth 3 Invasion. But the initial enthusiasm for the reboot quickly died out for a few reasons. Remember how I said it was an almost complete reboot? Batman and Green Lantern lore was largely untouched, though their timeline of events was condensed, which was confusing. Writers seemed to contradict each other on what was canon and what wasn't, adding to more confusion. The quality of the titles began to dip, and cancellations meant less variety than originally promised. What was supposed to be a clean start became a jumbled mess of the past and present. Something had to be done. So, legendary writer Jeff Johns came up with a plan to rival the brilliant Ozymandias. What if Dr. Manhattan altered the DC timeline and killed Superman's parents?
Are you dying of dementia?
It's an idea so genuinely bonkers, I'm surprised Doomsday Clock isn't a complete disaster. A lot happens in Doomsday Clock's 12 issues, but the story is more about the overall message than the individual details. The happenings are all in service of the greater plot. That point is that trying to mimic Watchmen has tarnished superheroes for decades. Doomsday Clock makes no effort to hide that it is an intentional imitation of Watchmen. The familiar faces are all there, even the comedians seemingly risen from the dead, the clock symbolism, poems capping each chapter, a piece of fiction that parallels events of the story, even the iconic 9-panel structure. But this isn't Alan Moore's Watchmen. He isn't writing. This is company-supported fanfiction. Rorschach is not Rorschach. This Rorschach attempts to speak like Rorschach, but speaks more like the way Rorschach writes, his inner monologues. This is because he never met Walter Kovacs, the real Rorschach, only read his diary. This man is Reggie Long, son of the therapist who tried and failed to reform Walter Kovacs. He mistakenly believes Kovacs and his father were friends, rather than a cynical psychopath who crushed his father's spirit. Ozymandias gives Reggie this lie in order to manipulate him into saving the world. Another issue of perception Reggie has, a theme that comes up in the story a lot, especially with the words, "You see what you want to see." Doomsday Clock takes a cue from Watchmen's use of William Blake's The Tiger, a poem that asserts understanding a thing means understanding its opposite as well. Every strong light casts a shadow, and every shadow helps distinguish the light. When we fail to acknowledge how our perception of a thing can warp our understanding of it, we create a poor imitation. When we cut to Clark sleeping, we see a book on his desk called Walden 2. This is a real novel about a commune of people trying to replicate an author's idea of utopia, and of course, the consequences that come from it. In Doomsday Clock, the DC universe has become an imitation of the Watchmen universe. A viral Superman conspiracy theory asserts that 90% of the world's superheroes are Americans because the American government has been creating them, engaging in a sort of global superpower arms race. Trust in heroes is turning sour. Riots fill the streets. Geopolitics is tipping toward disaster, and hope is at an all-time low. By now, it's common knowledge that the Watchmen characters are based on characters from Charleston Comics. But Doomsday Clock reinterprets this. Rorschach is Batman. Ozymandias is Luthor. The comedian is the Joker. Joker even wears the iconic smiley face pin. Dr. Manhattan is Superman. This is a statement that, just as Watchmen changed the perception of DC superheroes, these heroes warped the perception of Watchmen in their attempt to mimic it. When you gaze into the abyss gazes back. The relationship between Superman and Manhattan is pivotal to Doomsday Clock. Manhattan's altering of the timeline rewrites Superman's legacy. His parents died when he's young. He never meets the Legion of Superheroes. He doesn't join the Justice Society of America. In fact, they never exist. And it's here we discuss how the JSA is thematically important to Doomsday Clock. The JSA was one of the first superhero teams, home to many Golden Age heroes. The two heroes highlighted are Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, and Johnny Thunder, who could summon a wish-granting genie known as the Thunderbolt. Why these two in particular? It comes from a connection of inspiration for these characters, a connection referenced in Doomsday Clock. Both characters were inspired by the stories of Aladdin in 1001 Nights, or Arabian Nights as it's sometimes known. Alan's lantern is the magic lamp, and originally his name was going to be Alan Ladd, a more direct reference to the character. Johnny Thunder summons a wish-granting genie, pretty self-explanatory. Alan Scott discovered the lantern during a train crash. It saved his life. Manhattan moved the lantern away from a dying Alan. A superhero is never born. Johnny Thunder never finds the Thunderbolt genie. The JSA never happens. The Wishmakers, the Hope Bringers, are gone. In the New 52, the Justice Society of America was noticeably absent. Once the oldest super team in the DCU was replaced by the more popular Justice League. While the League were sort of a reactionary strike team, the JSA were more of a family, incorporating sons, daughters, and legacy characters into the fold. A reverence for the older heroes while routinely making way for the new. A dialectic the Justice League often struggled with. In Doomsday Clock, Ozymandias is relying on Manhattan as a sort of wishmaker, a genie who can fix everything. He even ends up summoning him with the Green Lantern. But Manhattan isn't a genie. That kind of simple magic and hope is absurd for the Watchmen universe. And for a determinist like John, why grant wishes when everything is preordained? This is the difference between Watchmen and DC, and, in a way, most superheroes. DC allows magic and wonder and hope. Wishes can be granted. The JSA represent that golden vision of hope in the past. It should also be noted that Jeff Johns wrote an acclaimed JSA run, so it's clear he has a reverence for the team. This concept of trying to create a glorious future by adhering to the past was also a theme of Watchmen. Nostalgia is the name of the game here. It's even the name of the perfume seen throughout Watchmen and referenced in issue 1 of Doomsday Clock. Adrian Veidt is a man trapped by nostalgia. His world is flung into chaos again. He hatches a plan again. He clones Bubastis again. He manipulates a world full of heroes again. Veidt is stuck in a loop, no different from the hands on a clock. Even when escaping to another universe, he sees similar problems to his own world and does practically the same scheme he pulled in Watchmen, but on a much, much shorter timescale. His machinations force the entire DC universe into a pale imitation of Watchmen, even recreating some scenes with DC characters. Firestorm's explosion mimics Dr. Manhattan's meltdown on the talk show. Characters meet Dr. Manhattan on Mars. Nuclear doom is at their doorstep. Factor in Manhattan altering the timeline, and we have a meta-context that Watchmen is literally influencing DC, morphing its universe to be more like itself, more violent, less hopeful, critical of itself to the point of deprecation. I feel this was the driving force behind the Dark Ages and DC's New 52, an attempt to ground and redefine classic characters for a modern audience. A noble endeavor. But in trying to get away from the bombastic capers and high concepts, the New 52 pulled away from what made these characters great in the first place. Nostalgia makes us yearn to return to a past that often never existed. We often look through rose-colored glasses and forget the bad things we moved on from, such as the homophobia of the past, which is seen in the Carver-Coleman storyline. Doomsday Clock makes the case that remembering the good of the past is fine, but there is no going back. Especially not with the attitudes of the Watchmen universe, and especially not with an unempathetic determinist like John, or an ends justify the means schemer like Ozymandias. But Marionette and the Mime challenge this. They're thematically linked to the concept of free will. This is ironic, considering a marionette is a puppet on strings, and a mime is a performer who's often stuck in boxes of his own making. Marionette and Mime are wholly original characters, though they seem designed to reflect the Joker and Harley Quinn. They fall into the story through sheer circumstance. The duo happen to be robbing a bank, which Manhattan happened to intercept, and Marionette happened to be pregnant, and it just so happened to make John spare her on a whim. Veidt chose to use this as a desperate attempt to convince John to save the world, a way to remind John of his humanity. But just as the Joker and Harley Quinn adopt their clownish personas as a sort of ironic joke, these two have adopted these personalities and continue to push towards free will, a direct challenge to Manhattan's view of the universe, that nothing can be affected, nothing changed. This is why Manhattan and Superman are presented as the climax for the series. The crux of Doomsday Clock involves a meeting between the two. Manhattan sees a future where Superman attacks him and then black. Nothing more. He surmises this means either he dies or the whole universe dies. And so, when Superman flies toward him, he accepts his fate. But Manhattan was wrong. Superman was attacking a supervillain behind Superman. In fact, saving Manhattan. Manhattan is determinism and inaction. There is no need to be compelled toward any action or cause because everything is already set to happen. No need to save others or even yourself. Superman is action, hope, and struggle for a better tomorrow. He debuted in Action Comics. The ending of Doomsday Clock has the child of Marionette and Mime raised by Dr. Manhattan, then given over to the family of Night Owl and Silk Spectre to be raised like Superman. This action spells out the final message of the series. It isn't about rebuking Watchmen entirely, or saying it was a mistake to be influenced by it. There's no attempt to destroy Watchmen's legacy. Instead, it's a call for a dialectic, a union of two parts to make a new whole, acknowledging the influence of the past while removing the parts that don't work. The DC universe is not the Watchmen universe, and should not try to be. Watchmen is a commentary on superheroes, and the deliberately bleak one. From conception, superheroes were designed to be earnest and beyond pessimism. The introspection Watchmen provided is good, but many misinterpreted this as a call for superheroes to grow up. A quote from Alan Moore. I didn't really think that superheroes were adult fare. I think this was a misunderstanding born of what happened in the 1980s, to which I must put my hand up to a considerable share of the blame, though it was not intentional. When things like Watchmen were first appearing, there were an awful lot of headlines saying comics have grown up. I tend to think that, no, comics hadn't grown up. I think it was more comics meeting the emotional age of the audience coming the other way. Just as the Ozymandias poem foretold, Watchmen's time is over. Now, here's where I stop waxing poetic and start pointing out the flaws of Doomsday Clock. First off, it's painfully dragged out. The series has 12 issues and doesn't need to be. I suspect it's 12 issues because Watchmen is 12 issues. Just like how the 9-panel page layout is adopted because Watchmen used it. As I said before, Doomsday Clock is more about the overall thematic point. The individual details aren't as important as the overall. While the story isn't all bad, there's so much that happens that doesn't really need to be there for the story at hand. Black Adam's sanctuary nation for metahumans, the comedian being plucked from his death. You could probably even cut out the entire Carver Coleman storyline and we would still get the overall point. So the story feels padded for a forced surface level reflection of Watchmen. I think a competent writer could turn this into a concise miniseries. I've talked about how much of a meta-text Doomsday Clock is, how it's meant to mirror Watchmen and provide a critique of that work. However, I'm not really sure how much of this is intentional, or me forcing connections that aren't really there. Yes, the story is clearly about the DC Universe needing to return to the hopeful nature of the Silver Age, but does that actually work with Watchmen? As stated by Moore, Watchmen was never a rebuke of the Silver Age or superheroes in general. It was more of a commentary on how forcing realism into superheroes would render them ineffective, foolish. The fact that this story was created as a way to reverse the changes of the New 52 only about 5 years after the launch of the event tells me this wasn't the plan from the beginning. In fact, it's likely that while the New 52 was planned, DC was still hoping Moore would return to Watchmen. But when Moore refused, DC attempted to capitalize on the brand with Before Watchmen. And when that also didn't work, they wanted another way to benefit from Watchmen. The messages about nostalgia can also get a bit jumbled at times. Sometimes the past is to be revered, like the JSA. Sometimes the past is to be moved on from, like Watchmen. Some might say this is nuance, I say this makes for a muddled metaphor. And possibly the biggest flaw of Doomsday Clock is Dr. Manhattan cannot manipulate time. This was never something he was able to do in Watchmen. He could view all of his experiences at once. He could see somewhat into the future, but in no way could he alter timelines the way he does in Doomsday Clock. Could you come up with some explanation that coming to the DC Universe increased or changed his powers? Sure, but it's a lame explanation, and just another example of the weird way Watchmen is forced into this story. On top of that, Manhattan's inability to see past Superman flying towards him makes no sense. In the original Watchmen, Manhattan's future sense was disrupted by Adrian Veidt using tachyons. This does not happen in Doomsday Clock, so why Manhattan couldn't see past this event is not explained. On top of that, this extensive altering of the universe makes Dr. Manhattan look like a complete psychopath. It is total character assassination. Jeff Johns is a good writer and his strengths are all here. The original characters, Reggie, Marionette, and Mime, are all enjoyable. The concept of Doomsday Clock itself is a rather brave take against one of the most acclaimed comic books, period. I didn't hate reading it. In fact, taking a second or third read-through made me appreciate more of it. It's just very clear that nothing of what happens in the story really matters outside of resetting the DC Universe. The whole plot is just dumb. I see Doomsday Clock as mostly a means to an end. DC wanted to capitalize on Watchmen. Readers wanted the New 52 reversed. And Jeff Johns, very likely, wanted the JSA and the Legion of Superheroes back in continuity. And in achieving those goals, it succeeds. It's also the most intense glazing of Superman I've ever read. The Big Blue literally becomes the center of the DC universe. Even Grant Morrison would blush. So, would I recommend you read Doomsday Clock? No. It has a decent message about the nature of superheroes and is a unique oddity. But you don't need to read 12 issues of events and characters that are designed to be retconned and never mentioned again. Except for in death metal, but that's a story for another time. Overall, Doomsday Clock is about shedding DC Comics of the misunderstood Watchmen influence to not just embrace the things that made them special in the mid-20th century, but also look towards a new future, a dialectic of comic history. These days, Invincible is incredibly popular, and it's a critical, super-violent take on heroes. DC's Absolute Universe and Marvel's Ultimate Universe are creating darker, less whimsical stories. So is this the dialectic we hoped for? Or will this lead us to another dark age of comics? Just like Dr. Manhattan, we cannot see that far ahead. The future is unknown.